Tonight we're going to talk about Git for Excel, and the agenda is as follows. So first we want to try to find out why do we ever want to use Git with Excel. We're going to have a quick look at some basic Git commands. Then we're going to see why is it actually not so easy as it may seem, or why is it a bit of a nasty thing, the combination. And then I have kind of made up 4 golden rules when using Git and Excel. And then we're going to dive into a little bit technical stuff, some tools that we can use, and that makes a lot of the things a lot easier. And finally, we get into merge conflicts and how we can deal with them. And the last point is not on the agenda, but maybe the most important ones. I would, again, like to move on to the pub after this meetup. So I don't remember which one it was we went to, but it's just getting out and on the right-hand side, and you'll just end up in the pub. So it would be really great to meet a lot of you afterwards for some relaxed Q&A in the pub for a beer or two. I know it's Monday, but we can start slow. Before we get started, though, I quickly wanted to go through the different things that we do and what we actually do besides xlwings. So we're a small team. We're 3 people. And we are trying to create innovative solutions for Microsoft Excel. And what we mean by that is basically in the following slides. So probably most of you have heard about xlwings or maybe tried it out already. Today, we're actually not going to talk about xlwings too much, or not at all, to be precise. So yeah, xlwings gave the name to the meetup. I'm not going to talk too much about it because I'm pretty sure that we will have a few more meetups where we will touch on xlwings again. Maybe the last point is worth mentioning here. We do offer now commercial plans, which means that we offer professional support for xlwings, and we offer included video training and a few other things. The other tool is going to show up here or there in today's talk. So I'm actually at this point jumping over it. That would be XLTrail. Same for Git XL, the open source library, which makes writing VBA a little bit easier with Git. So I'm not going to mention too much about it because we're going to get back to it during the course of this little talk. Then this is basically more of a consulting solution. I have, for those who were here last time, I have mentioned that at the very end of the last meetup. So it's basically using xlwings to run automated tests, unit tests with Excel automatically when you push your code to your Git repository. So kind of really continuous integration, as you may be used to it from other computing languages, applied the same principle to Excel. And finally, we have another solution that is kind of around the corner and coming up. It's, well, recently we made a little survey asking xlwings users about how they use actually the library. And by far, most of the users, they do use it for reporting purposes. And so we just recently had the case that we were asked to, make it a little bit easier for that use case for the reporting. And so the xlwings-reports package is actually on top of xlwings. Will be part of the enterprise offering that we will have on top of the xlwings open source library. And so what this problem solves is actually it offers you a way to define a template. And where you see performance in these double curly braces, that's really just a placeholder. So whatever variable you have in Python, which is called performance, that might be a data frame or I don't know, some other variables, some numbers, that will be replaced in your template. And the advantage to probably the way that you're doing it is that somebody can change the template he or she can move around the placeholder, she or he can change the coloring, and so on, without having to actually know about the Python code. So it doesn't, require changes in the Python code when you move around your objects or when you duplicate an object. So that's actually quite nice because you can split the work. You can have a designer or a business user who takes care of the template, and then you can have the analyst who, writes the Python code, gets access to the APIs or the databases, and then creates that script, which then eventually will find the template and create the report. But this will be definitely part of another meetup with a little bit more detail at some point. So at this point, I'd like to start off with the actual talk and explain why it might be a good idea to use Git together with Excel. And this tweet is pretty much hitting it, is pretty much spot on. Probably a picture that you have seen before, a lot of Excel versions. I've seen this at my previous job at UBS. People, they sort in the Explorer by last modified, and then just assume that the one at the top is probably the one they should be using going forward. And apart from that, it's just the usual reasons why you might be using a thing such as version control. So first off, Excel is just code. You have if statements, you have complex formulas that are hard to understand. So treating Excel, even more so if you have VBA, treating it as a code object does totally make sense. Then using Git is probably an easy decision these days. It's just that everybody is using Git. Well, except for those who are using SVN or maybe Perforce. But let's say for a little bit smaller companies, they are, meanwhile, I guess, most of them are on Git. It's battle tested. The Windows source code, the Linux source code, they are all managed by Git, so it does work. It's also a great way to collaborate with multiple users. Microsoft has actually tried a few things to get that right. They tried with shared workbooks. Then they deprecated that. Now they use co-authoring. And I guess both of these solutions, they solve some problems, but not all of it. And Git has a solid way for collaboration. And then finally, it's the spreadsheet governance aspect. It creates an audit trail that sometimes companies have more and more, the pressure from internal, but also from legal reasons. And it does, it does give you kind of the tool set for a proper peer review, for a proper approval process, so that changes in your Excel workbooks are a bit more organized than just sending it out back and forth by email and attaching a V1 edit Bob final to it. And all of this, I guess, is here to hopefully reduce the errors that you have in your spreadsheets. Is there anybody here who really doesn't have any clue about Git, never heard of it, and really doesn't know the very basics about it? That's awesome. If there are any, then I would advise just go on Google and do search for Git tutorial. There's plenty of those. I won't have the time today to get into the details here, into the Git basics, but still just to lay out basically what we're dealing with. The usual Git workflow is to use Git diff. If you're writing, let's say, code, you can see what did you change, and then you do git add. Basically, you select those files that you want to include in that commit, into that snapshot. And then you say git commit and give it a descriptive change name. So you describe whatever you did during that session. And then you push it to the origin, to GitHub or GitLab or BitBucket. And at this point, basically, your collaborators, your coworkers can do a git pull and get your work on their local machine. So that's basically the Git magic, add, commit, push. That's kind of the core of it. And so where's the issue with all that if we use Excel workbooks? So there's a couple of issues. First off, Git doesn't understand the Excel workbooks. And it does give you the message that book 1 differs. Well, the version A differs from the version B, but it doesn't give you more than that. It doesn't tell you what changed within the Excel workbook. And the same is actually true for the servers. So GitHub doesn't understand Excel neither. And all the others, they don't understand it neither. So GitLab, BitBucket, whatever you're using, you will be seeing, like here in GitHub, you will be seeing a View Raw button. You can download the workbook, but you cannot basically look at the content like you do with all the other text-based files. Then the third issue we have is that Excel files tend to become quite big. Excel files are a mix of data and code. And well, for example, if you just have a 25 megabyte file and commit it just a single time every workday, then by the end of the year you would have 7 gigs. And if you commit a bit more, not just once per day, or if your workbook is a bit bigger, somebody just mentioned like 80 megabytes is not like made up. So that really adds to the size. And several gigabytes still these days are a bit of a hassle to clone that initially. And it does take away a lot of your local hard disk. So we will see what we can do to improve this situation. And then finally, maybe one of the things that kind of shocks people the most if they kind of recently starting to learn about Git is merge conflicts. And often you just do a Git pull and then you're greeted with a merge conflict. And I've seen kind of experienced coders who would then go and just delete the whole repository and do a Git clone from the beginning, and then kind of, that way to kind of choose that way to resolve the merge conflict. And that's probably not the best way to go about it. The unfortunate thing about Excel and Git and merge conflicts is that we have a lot more merge conflicts with Excel files than we have with text files, and on top of that, it's harder to resolve. So it's kind of really unfortunate in that respect. But we can see why that is, and we will see also how we can make that a little bit easier. So I've talked to a lot of people over the last couple of years. When I have them on the phone and we talk about Git and Excel and they start using it. And I have kind of made up 4 golden rules of what I think a lot of like newbies don't do correctly when they start using Git and start using it for Excel. So one of the first things that you should do is not just, grab the latest version of your local dump with all the tags and version numbers and timestamps and edit messages in it, but you should really remove all that and just leave the plain vanilla file name and check that into Git and use that going forward. All the other stuff that you probably had previously on those Excel files in the file name, Git will actually take care of that for you. And then the second rule is make use of commit messages. And maybe if you start using Git or GitHub for the first time, then probably one or the other person is using maybe the upload over the web UI, and then it's kind of pre-filled with uploaded file name, and that doesn't really help much. So if you ever did something like edit Bob or whatever fixes, error fixes or something, if you added something like this into the file name, that is actually where you should put that information. And the good thing about that is you have a lot of space, so you can use a lot of words to describe whatever you changed, and you should do that so that other people can actually see what you were working on and can make sense of the changes. And you can see that obviously Git takes care of who made the change, they take care of the timestamp, so really all that can disappear from the file name. Then the third point is about gitignore. So gitignore is a special file in Git that you just write .gitignore, and you add file patterns to it. So you can add specific files to it, or you can add file patterns like I have below here that instruct Git to actually completely ignore those files. And as you are probably aware of, if you open an Excel workbook, then it creates another a temporary file that starts with this tilde. And if you then go there and just say, git add dot, basically add everything and git commit, then all of a sudden you have committed and pushed these temporary files. And I didn't make that up. That's actually one of my repositories I ended up with. So it definitely happens. And it's kind of one step more if you ever do that and you want to get it out. So you probably end up on Stack Overflow to resolve that issue. So if you intend to track Excel workbooks, then my advice is really just start off by adding the following ignore pattern here to Excel, so that should kind of capture all of the different Excel formats. Then the last golden rule here is to use Git tags to actually release your Excel files. So before you were doing a v1, a v2 maybe, underscore v1, v2 in your shared drive. And you may want to use that actually for files that you pass on to other people. So you may, during maybe, let's say, you work for a couple of weeks or a couple of days on your financial model, and then you get to a point where you want to deploy it to other users, to your team, to your coworkers. And at this point, it actually may make sense to reintroduce the version number into the file name. But the way you should do it is, first of all, you should tag your repository and give it a descriptive version name. So that can be version 1, or maybe it can be something else that makes sense in that context. And if you then want to send out an Excel file that has this version tag on it, then just do it manually, or even better, design a continuous integration pipeline which automates that process. So what that means is you tag your repository with the version, and automatically in the background it goes off and tags or renames that file name and attaches it, and this is the important point, it attaches it as a release document or as an artifact, or you could imagine like a build file, and it does not add it to the Excel, to the Git repository as such. So you're not changing the rules, you're never going to change the file name that you will check into Git. It's really just that there is a release asset that you create, and there is a place usually on all of these Git providers. As I said, GitHub calls it the release page. So that is where those named files actually should be stored. And that were the golden rules. Let me know if you have any questions so far. All right, so the next section is like a condensed sections about tools that will help you work with Git and Excel. And the first one is Spreadsheet Compare. Does anybody already use or has heard about Spreadsheet Compare? Okay, quite a few, all right. So Spreadsheet Compare is, well, as you can imagine, is here to compare to Excel spreadsheets. And it's a standalone desktop app. It can be started from the Inquire add-in that I believe was a bit more popular a few years ago. And it's kind of integrated into Microsoft Office and probably into most versions that you use at work at least. Maybe if you have something like Office Home at home, then you would not have it. But my guess is that at work, you most probably will have it. And There is a way how you can integrate it with Git. I won't show it today, but you can read all about it, all the details on our blog post. So that basically you can use Git diff and it puts the two versions into that tool. And for that, I just wanted to quickly show you how you can find it. So one way is you go basically on the Windows button and just start writing Spreadsheet Compare. So if you never saw that, just type it and most likely you will find it. And the other way would be if you are in Excel and you have activated the Inquire add-in, which is not activated by default. So you would have to go to Developer, which is also not activated by default. But in the end, you end up in the COM add-ins, and there you can activate it. And you could also click the Compare Files button here. This will also start Spreadsheet Compare, and I believe it pre-fills it with those files that you already have opened in your Excel session. I think so. I believe so. It's definitely part of Office 365. I think it's been around for quite some time. 13 maybe, yeah. But yeah, give it a try. If you write Spreadsheet Compare, then you'll probably find out quite fast. So the way that this works is really just you compare files. You click on the Compare File button, and then you will get the option here to search for two files. So that's a bit the issue. So you do have to search for them. So it keeps the one that I used last time. So instead of bothering, I just show you this real quick. Here, versions of the file next to each other, and then you have a list of changes below here, and then some options you can use to actually see which changes you would like to see. So a lot of people actually use that if they have to compare two files as a one-off.
So there's issues with the VBA code, right?
Yeah. So there. I mean, yeah, you could. Yeah. So the VBA code. Right, looks a bit not very much 2019. And also you can only look at kind of one module at the same time.
Between diff, right?
I wouldn't know. But yeah, it's actually possible. And then sometimes I believe you get a bit of noise also. So actually it's an empty module. So it's, yeah, on the VBA side, it's probably not like the most beautiful solution that you have.
It's also potentially a backdoor to the lockdown model. When the model is completely locked and you use Spreadsheet Compare, it shows VBA code, it shows password.
Yeah, I've never tried that. You mean like if the Excel file is locked down, the VBA code? Yeah, I've never tried that. Yeah, but it's actually something worth trying out. All right, then the other tool that I would like to present is obviously our own solution to the issue, which is basically a GitHub for Excel files. So Excel Trail is, as I said, it's a web-based application. You can try it out on your own. There's a free trial. It works by either synchronizing with an existing Git provider, so it can hook up with GitHub or BitBucket or whatever you use internally or externally. And then alternatively, for business users who don't bother or couldn't be bothered to learn the basics of Git, there's a drag and drop mechanism that allows you to have the Git repository kind of shielded away in the background. And you can compare anything that you have there. And so real quick, I could show you this in the real world here. So for example, let's say I have this, say this repository here, you can see that you have the files here, and when you click on the files, you're not greeted by a raw file that you can download, but you can actually see the contents of that file. So you can see all those spreadsheets over here. You can have a look at the content here. And the same is true for the VBA modules in here. And then you can actually see the changes live and do that on a per module level, like here. Sorry, let's go back. Or here on the contacts level. Or you can also basically go to the history and then see the changes in a summary view. So you can actually see that I've touched multiple spreadsheets here and a module at the bottom, like a code module here. So that's kind of the overview of all the diffs, and it really works the same as you should be used to it from any GitHub commit that you push with just text files. It just makes, Excel files basically understood by your version control system. So that's basically very high level how Excel Trail works. It really does the same red and green for code, for VBA code, as also for the spreadsheets. And if you have a lot of VBA code, for example, we can have a look at a real world example here. Then you can see there is a lot to it, and you can go into history and then get maybe another change where there's a lot of changes here. So you can see all those changes are, unlike the Spreadsheet Compare, a bit like, more 2019 in the formatting, but also all VBA modules here on a single page together with the changes on the spreadsheets. So these are just the screenshots to explain it again. Summary page, context, which is quite helpful. But then apart from Excel Trail, which is our commercial solution, we have another tool which is called Git XL. And Git XL, again, is an open source and a free Git extension. And that one actually works with your local Git repository. So what can it do? It can actually help you to properly diff and especially important merge VBA code on your local Git repository. And this means that instead of what we saw before, binary files differ, what you get now is actually the output from Git diff, which understands your VBA code. So Git XL will properly highlight the changes for you locally, either here on the command line, or if you use Sourcetree by any chance, then you're lucky because it integrates with Git XL seamlessly. So you don't even have to do any code changes. You don't even have to tell it which external differ to use. It literally works out of the box. So if you have one of the really latest versions of Sourcetree, which is the free GUI client from Atlassian, the guys from BitBucket, then you just need to install Git XL, and Sourcetree will happily give you the diffs of the VBA code in that lower right corner. So that's actually very nice, and hopefully there is other Git GUI tools who will follow here. Then Git XL does, as I said, help you in the merging. And what that means is it properly merges the VBA code together. So if I work on a module and somebody else works on another module, then it really merges that part together. And it does so, except if you have a proper merge conflict. So if I edit the same line of code like somebody else, then it will actually mark it as a as a merge conflict. It will tell you which modules do have a merge conflict, and then it will mark it, as you see here in the screenshot, directly in the VBA editor. It will mark it with red, and you can resolve that merge conflict properly. And so basically, the issues with merge conflicts is pretty much solved by Git XL on the side of VBA. It's not solved on the sheet side. So, but still, it can, if you are heavy users of VBA, it does do a very good job and kind of leaves you with the sheet parts alone. Let me just grab a bit of water. All right, so the next tool I would like to present is called Git LFS, Git Large File Storage. And this again is an open source tool. It's basically made by GitHub and Atlassian. And it works very much the same like Git XL. It's a local Git extension. And Git LFS is here to basically deal with large files. And what it does in detail is it basically it does a sort of lazy downloading, lazy loading. So instead of like cloning the whole repository with all 1,500 past versions of your workbook, it really just downloads that version that you currently look at in your working directory. So whenever you do git checkout, it goes to the server and downloads the file, but all the other files it leaves alone. So that means the initial cloning is much faster, and also the issue that we have with gigabytes of local repository are basically gone. So the only thing you need to make sure is that your Git provider on the server side supports it. And meanwhile, that's pretty much all of the major providers, so that shouldn't be to worry about. But then you do need to actually tell it to track Excel files. So there is this command that you need to basically do at the beginning to set up a repository to actually use Git LFS for the Excel formats, and that's Git LFS track, and then again kind of the wildcard which matches to Excel files. As last point here, I have this remark that Git was actually working on adding this feature into native Git, and they released something last year, but it's probably still kind of emerging, and so it's something to watch, but it may not be like ready for prime time at this time. But I thought it's worth mentioning that Git really is looking into solving that issue natively. And if you have your repository, if you have Git LFS installed, it's supported by your Git provider, and if you have set it up for the repository as such, then it's kind of, you can forget about it. So you can use your standard git commands, git add, git commit, git push, and Git LFS will do the work behind the scenes. So from that point on, you're actually free to forget about it, and it's really just handled behind the scenes. But if you use the command prompt, then you will see there's a line which actually confirms that it's using Git LFS, and most of the Git providers, they do also mark those files that are tracked. They do mark them with some kind of LFS tag. Then I thought it's worth mentioning the different Git clients. That is maybe especially interesting for people who are new to Git. So I've shown a lot of screenshots from the command line. That's obviously kind of the purest way of dealing with it, and potentially also for some people the easiest, or I don't know. But then there's a lot of people who are not like especially friends with the command line. So for those people, there's a couple of other solutions. So there's desktop clients. GitHub has one. It's free. I believe it's open source. Atlassian has one. The Sourcetree, which we we're just looking at in context of Git XL. And there is like 100 of other GUI clients that you can use. I've pasted the link here. And there is both commercial ones, there is many free ones. There is some that are cross-platform and some for just a single platform. So you can look up the whole world of these GUI clients on this link here. And by the way, I will put the slides on SlideShare. I actually wanted to do that before the meetup, but then I forgot about it. So you need to wait for it until I upload them after the meeting. Then you have the File Explorer integration. So many of you may have used Tortoise for SVN. And there is a version that actually does the same for Git. So that's another version that people kind of like to use it. I believe I do have it installed here. And that means that you would then basically get this overlay here. So when it's green, it's basically it's committed, it's current. And then if you do changes, then it will turn into a yellow question mark or exclamation mark. And then if there is a merge conflict, it will also show you that. And then finally, there is also the way of using the Git provider as such. So you can always go to GitHub directly and say that you want to upload a new file, and then you can basically drag and drop the file directly on the system. And that way, that may work or may be a good solution for people who very seldomly work on files in Git. So they wouldn't even necessarily have to install a local client. As I'm aware of, all of those providers support that, except for BitBucket. I didn't find a way to use that on BitBucket. And this brings us to the last, but kind of most difficult topic, which is merge conflicts. And I can assure you that they will come and bite you, because probably a lot of people think that if they work alone on a Git repository, or maybe if they just work on a master branch, that this kind of prevents them from running into merge conflicts. But that's not true. So even if you are just a single person and you are just working on a single branch, you can easily run into merge conflicts. And like the classic example would be that you work in the office and you push, commit and push during the day, and then you go home and you continue to work, but you forget to pull the changes you made during the day. And then, in the moment you push, you basically have to pull, and when you pull, you end up in a merge conflict. And this is basically an attempt to explain when and why a merge conflict happens, and why it happens more often than if you use just standard text files. So there is really just two situations that you can end up with. The one on the left-hand side is kind of a really good one. So for example, you use two branches, and you branch off here. So the gray commits here are the master branch, and you branch off and you go into a branch, which I called just my branch, and you make the white commits here on the branch. And if you are in this position and try to merge my branch back into master, then you will have no issue, because you really didn't do any, parallel work on different branches. You were just on a different branch, but in the end, you may as well have just stayed on master. So Git, in that case, will do the same as it does with text files. It really just pushes over your branch on master, and that's called a fast forward merge. But if you're in the situation here on the right, then that's not going to happen. So in the situation on the right means that in the moment when you branched off your my branch, then since you did that, since you branched your branch off, somebody else pushed to master, or maybe merged another branch into master. And in that moment, so we have different commits on master and on my branch. And so in this moment, Git does absolutely have to make a merge commit. So it absolutely has to do a proper true merge. And as I kind of mentioned previously, it usually is able to resolve and automatically merge these kind of things for text files, but it will never be able to do that with Excel files. And that's really just because it doesn't know how to automatically merge Excel files. So long story short, for Excel files, it means whenever you have a divergent branch between the two that you are trying to merge, whenever master, let's say, is ahead of the branch at the moment you try to merge back, then you will absolutely always get a merge conflict. And only in that situation on the left, when you are doing a fast forward, then everything is going to be fine. So what can we do about all that? So there's probably just two solutions to that. One is the file locking, so kind of, prevent people from ending up in a file, in a merge conflict altogether. And the other one is actually deal with the situation and know how to resolve merge conflicts. So let's look at the first case to start with. And there's what I call informal file locking. So basically, file locking means only ever a single person is working on that Excel file. And it's kind of it's a workflow that is well understood and kind of practiced all over the world. Mostly if you save your workbook on a shared drive. So like you probably remember when your coworker has the worksheet open and you try to open it from the shared drive, you will get a pop-up saying, it's already opened by somebody else. Do you want to open read-only or notify when the other person closes it? So that's kind of the file locking that is baked into Excel and used widely for anybody who uses shared drive. Then SharePoint, for anybody who has used SharePoint to manage Excel files, does have basically the mechanism of also checking out and checking in the file. So it's also kind of an exclusive right to edit a certain file. And to basically use that with Git, there's a very simple solution. Just talk to each other. And that can work depending on how your team is positioned. But then if you're looking for something more formal, then there is actually this feature baked into Git LFS. And so in the more recent versions of Git LFS, starting with version 2.0, there's this mechanism for file locking. So last year, there weren't, not all of the providers were supporting the file locking, but meanwhile, from what I checked, all of them, caught up, and so today you can use GitHub or GitLab or BitBucket, and they all, or even Azure DevOps, and they all support the official Git LFS file locking API. And it does work the same. So if you have set up your repository to work with Git LFS, then it does work the same. The only thing you need to change, like if you look at the last line, is you absolutely do need to explicitly tell which files need to be lockable. So then you do need to add this switch here. And in the next slide, I'm going to show you how basically the mechanism works if you use Git LFS for file locking. But before that, it's still to remember. So like even if you do use file locking with Git, there is these two things to remember. So you actually need to remember to actually lock the file. And the other thing is really that even if you lock the file, you do have to remember to do a git pull before you start working on it, because otherwise you still end up in a merge conflict. So that's just to remember here. So the Git LFS file locking mechanism is pretty simple. As you see, two users left and right. So me, I'm here on the left. I just say Git LFS lock whatever the name of the book is, and it gets confirmed by locked book 2. And then my coworker Jenny, she goes there and she also wants the logbook too. And then she will get the message that, you know, the log exists. And so that's basically telling her that she should wait and maybe find out who has the log. And so she can do that by doing Git LFS logs, and she can see that this is really me who is logging the file. And then she can, you know, call me or chat me up. And so I can basically then, if I'm done, I can just say Git LFS unlock, and then the log is released, and she then can acquire the log. So that's basically the more formal version of file locking versus kind of really just, you know, by convention. And so at the end of this talk, we're going to see how we can actually really embrace the Git workflow, really use different branches and, you know, have different people work at different branches at the same time. And to do that, let's just imagine that we are on the master branch and we would like to merge my branch into master branch. So as you can see here, I'm on the master branch and I just say git merge my branch, and then I'm greeted with the conflict message and that I have to fix the conflicts before I can move on. And so I can, as I said, I can just run away, I can delete everything, I can clone from scratch, or I can, you know, search Stack Overflow for how these things work with binary files. But an easy way I found actually to deal with that situation is to use the command git mergetool when that conflict has come up. And by default, git mergetool will ask you something like which mergetool you want to use, and then you just cancel out, and git mergetool will add 4 different files. So it will add the backup, the base, the local, and the remote version of that file. And now you have, while you are in that merge conflict resolution state, you have both versions of the files here. So you have the original here, which is my master version, and then you have the remote version, which is really the version from my branch that I'm trying to merge in. And so at this stage, you can actually move on and use, for example, Spreadsheet Compare that I showed you before, put these 2 files in and actually see what the difference is, and then manually take over the changes from my branch that you want to apply to your master branch. XLTrail in that regard also helps you. So with XLTrail, you don't even have to do basically that kind of workaround with git merge tool to get to those different versions. You can really just go into XLTrail. You can go here and you could put in the 2 different branches in the comparison box, and then click on compare, and that will give you the comparison across branches. And so that is just basically helping you to see really how they differ and what changes. So you could, for example, see I am overriding something on my master branch from my branch, and you could fix that on the combined version. But in the end, the merge conflict resolution has to be manual on the side of the sheets. And once you have done that, you basically really just have to git add, git commit. You can get rid of all these 4 additional files, and you can, in that way, commit the resolution, and you're done with your merging. So these are basically the 2 ways that you can actually deal with merge conflicts, or kind of try to get around it, or, well, embrace it and try to really adopt a multi-branch workflow. From what I hear from our users, multi-branch workflow does kind of work, but only if you really merge very often. So basically, you do a small change, and then you merge, and then that works. But if you basically have, if you refactor your whole spreadsheet, you have 12 new sheets, and you change all the others, then it's impossible to really keep the overview and do a proper merge. And with that, that's already it that there is to Git and Excel. So before I answer your question, I would just like to mention that a lot of the things that I presented today are, you can find more infos about it on our blog post, on our blog. We have a lot more detail. I was a bit high level today, but there are potentially a lot more details to all these topics. So it's probably worth to kind of dig through. There's a couple of blog posts we have over the years, so you can find quite a bit of information there. And finally, if you have questions or anything, then please feel free to link me up on LinkedIn. I'd be happy to connect, and we can continue the conversation there.